Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1034B, and today's date is July 28th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Splits the Proxy Armies in the Middle East to Bypass the UN Resolution. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, at this point, we realize that Obamacare is a complete nightmare, and everything that they told us is a complete lie. It is not the Affordable Care Act. There's nothing affordable about it. And we see that there's a new government report that's out there that shows that the average Obamacare Medicaid expansion enrollee cost for the federal government was $6,366 in 2015, 49% above the per-person cost of $4,281 projected a year ago. So really what we're seeing here is Obamacare, all it is just taking more and more from the people. And it's not a benefit whatsoever. Now, we talk about privacy, we talk about our constitutional rights, and there's a federal judge that just ruled, and this is coming from U.S. District Judge Phyllis Hamilton. She issued a 17-page ruling which found the practice of placing recording devices on the steps of courthouses in Oakland and Martinez in California to be unsettling, but not in violation of your rights of the Fourth Amendment. And we talked about this before, where the FBI, other agencies are placing microphones around the area. And to me, this is a violation of my Fourth Amendment right, because I looked up the word privacy. Now, the definition of privacy is the state or condition of being free from being observed or disturbed by other people. So, we have the right to privacy. It doesn't say in a public setting, well, they're being observed and they're being disturbed by other people. So, when we look at this, we can see that yeah, our rights tell us that the agencies, the police, cannot do this. But of course, what we're seeing is the U.S. government chipping away at those rights. And like I said, we need to back up our rights. Because we can see the government at any turn, they will try to say you don't have them. Now, can they take them away? Absolutely not. These are not privileges, but they're trying to convince everyone that they are. They're trying to convince everyone that they can control your rights, but they can't. Because we're the ones who decide what they are, not the government, not the Supreme Court. And this is why we always need to back them up. This is why we need to keep our private information private. Just like you lock up your house, you lock up your car, you lock up your valuables, you lock up your information. You protect yourself in many different ways. You can use encryption to encrypt any information that's on your computer. You can use email encryption to encrypt your emails that you send to someone. You can use Block It Pocket, which is a sleeve that you can slip your phone into. It's intertwined with metals, blocks the signal. You can use it for your credit cards. You can take your information and not store it on your computer, but you can store it someplace else and lock it up in a safe. So there's many different ways you can protect yourself, but we need to continually do this. So the U.S. government understands we're backing up our rights. Of course, they don't want us to do this. They're going to try to convince us that this is something that you don't need to do. You can trust us. We're the government. Well, guess what? We don't have to trust anyone, especially the government. Now, since the two alleged terror attacks in Germany, we've seen different things happen. There's more police on the ground. We see German special forces. They're now raiding mosques, apartments in a crackdown to get those Salafists. We also see that Germany is now considering deploying the army inside the country in the wake of these attacks. Lawmakers in Berlin, they're discussing the possibility of establishing troops of reservists to aid the police. And we see a pattern emerging. Every time there's some type of alleged terror attack, we see each one of these countries do the same exact thing. And we're seeing it here. It's all part of the same agenda. Because as things rapidly fall apart, they want a system where they can rapidly deploy their troops and get them immediately on the ground to control the situation. Because we know when the economy comes down, when everything freezes up, people are going to be upset, scared. It's going to be riots. Those people might even go after their representatives. And we know the representatives are very, very nervous about this. They fear for their authority. They like to be in control. And they like to be prepared for these types of situations. And they like to be protected, with weapons, by the way. So we can see this has been following the same pattern. Actually, every time something happens to the White House, what do? They extend the buffer zone. They add spikes. They up the fence a couple more feet. They put more guards outside. They continually do this because they're getting prepared and ready. We see things are heating up in the South China Sea. We see Russia and China. They're going to be holding a joint military drill. And we can see this is coming next month. And, of course, the U.S. is going to make a really big deal about this. Most likely they're going to try to sail their ships right in the same area, hoping that something happens. Because all we see is the U.S. provoking war in the South China Sea, provoking North Korea, provoking Russia, provoking China. We see Moscow and China. They're warning the United States right now that the deployment of the THAAD missile system, well, this might have consequences. And they're saying the missile system is undermining the stability in the region. Well, this is exactly what the United States wants. This is why they're thinking about bringing more of these types of missiles into the area. They want the region to become unstable. That's the whole point. Because they want war. Now, out in Afghanistan, we all know now that the United States is never leaving Afghanistan. Actually, we'll probably be ramping up a lot more troops in Afghanistan. But we've spent a lot, actually I shouldn't say we, the U.S. government central bankers, they took our money and they used it in all these different locations. And out in Afghanistan, they were building homes for displaced Afghans. Now, I mean, that's okay, but what about all the homeless people here in the United States? Where are their homes? How about all those people that lost their jobs? Where are their jobs? And the United States spent $67 million in this area. And right now, those homes that the United States built in this area, they're getting demolished. Locals are destroying them. So once again, all the schools that are built there, homes that are built there, the war that is continuing on there for no reason whatsoever but to control the poppy fields, keep the strategic location, keep the oil flowing through the oil pipeline, continually keep Russia and China out of the area because there's a huge lithium copper deposit. All of this was a complete waste of money. And that bill seems to always come back to the American taxpayer. Now, out in Ukraine, we see Kiev is issuing a statement in the UN Security Council in response to Russia making the decision to include Crimea in the Southern Federal District of Russia. And the document called on countries of the world to ignore the results of the March 16, 2014 referendum, where the residents of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol voted overwhelmingly for reunification with Russia. Now, Putin just signed the decree merging Crimea into Russia, and Kiev is saying, no, we are not going to acknowledge this. We want Crimea back, and Russia has to give it back to Ukraine. Now, as we can see, Ukraine is continually moving military assets to the front line, and we're getting intelligence reports that there are about 77 units of military equipment from the Ukrainian security forces that have moved to the front line. According to the intelligence data, there have been deployed 9 units of the self-propelled artillery, 5 120mm mortars, 17 tanks, 800 personnel, and armored personnel carriers are all there on the front lines. Now, Russia sees this happening. They understand that NATO is moving military assets and troops encircling Russia. So Russia decided, what we need to do is we need to reinforce our borders with troops. And we'll place more troops in Crimea, since it's part of Russia right now. And this is exactly what is happening. So we see a buildup of Russian troops inside its country, and we see a buildup of troops of U.S. and the rest of NATO right outside of Russia's door. Now, if this was happening in the United States, and we saw Russia building troops on the border of the United States in Canada and Mexico, how would this look? This would look like they're getting ready to do something. And this is exactly how it looks to Russia. We see the U.S. just launched a spy satellite entrusted with a top-secret reconnaissance mission, and it launched from Florida, Cape Canaveral, and it was atop an Atlas V rocket. Now, Erdogan, he has closed 130 media organizations. He has closed 16 television broadcasters, 23 radio stations, 45 newspapers, 15 magazines, 29 publishers, to shut down anything that is going on inside the country. Right now we see an indicator that Turkey is pulling away from the West. Turkey has pulled back its officials that were monitoring refugee flow in Greece. Now, they're saying that their passports expired, but don't worry, they'll be returning. And this just seems like it's a story. It looks like they're pulling their people out. And we're going to have to watch that situation. But that is an indicator that they're pulling away. We see that Turkey, as they're doing this investigation, they've named a second American coup plotter, Henry Barkey. He's a former CIA personnel and the current director of the Middle East program at Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, known as the policymaker for U.S. authority. He was the second top American figure who orchestrated the coup attempt in Turkey. And we can see right now that the U.S., NATO, they were definitely part of this coup plan. And it seems that it's falling apart right now. Now, very interestingly, Erdogan has been taking more and more power for himself. And we can see right now that Erdogan, he wants the armed forces and the National Intelligence Agency to be brought under the control of the presidency. So basically he wants the army, the spy agency, all under his control. We see there's a anti-US, anti-NATO rally at the Incirilik Air Base in Turkey. People are out there and they are chanting that the U.S. is part of the coup. Now, this could have been set up by Erdogan. But we can see already that they want the base closed and they want the U.S. out of there, which is another indicator showing us that Turkey might be moving to the side of Russia, pulling away from NATO. And American officials have informed U.S. citizens that the consulate in the city will be closed at the time of the protest to protect the American citizens. Now, Turkey has said, if we reveal that Washington was involved in the failed Turkish coup, Turkey might leave NATO and move to the Chinese and Russian-led security and economic organizations instead. Now, this is another indicator, but they're just saying it. They haven't done it yet. So we need to watch this very, very carefully on what happens here. Now, the U.S. has been bombing Syria for the last year. They've had the proxy armies inside Syria, where they've been killing many civilians, killing women, children, torturing people. And the U.S., with their propaganda, kept on coming out saying it was Assad, it was Assad. But right now, the United States military, they have found enough credible information to begin a formal investigation into the allegations that the U.S.-led coalition airstrikes killed civilians on July 19th. This is where they hit 73 civilians and they died. They were made up of women and children. This is the worst reported civilian toll of any coalition attack since the bombing began. And of course, all they kept on doing was blaming it on Syria or Russia. And it turns out, no, it was the United States. Of course, that was part of the propaganda. Now, Russia is going to open humanitarian corridors in Aleppo to allow large-scale humanitarian operation to bring in the supplies that are needed there. We see that Syria has cut off the last supply route to the Islamic State. And right now, the proxy army for the U.S. government central bankers, they're done. And the U.S. is truly backed in a corner right now. This is why they're trying so hard to make some type of deal with Russia, to save whatever they have left there. And they're going to meet on July 29th, which is tomorrow, to talk about everything in Syria, about who are the terrorists, who are the moderate rebels. And then we hear that al-Nusra and al-Qaeda decide to call it splits. They're going to separate. Now, the first thing that I thought of was, why would they separate at this time? Because we know the UN resolution sees al-Qaeda and al-Nusra as terrorists. So they're going to rename themselves. They're going to rename themselves to something completely different. And their new name is Levantine Conquest Front. Now, they just created a new terrorist group where the UN does not recognize them as a terrorist group. Why is the U.S. doing this? Because Russia was continually out there saying, listen, we see al-Nusra, we see al-Qaeda as terrorist groups. Please separate them. Well, the U.S. kept on using the argument they can't do this. And now, by splitting them off, renaming them, they're not considered a terrorist group, the U.S. was able to bypass the UN resolution. And now when Russia says to do this, they're saying, no, it's not the same group anymore. Now, will Russia buy this? We'll have to wait and see. But we can see how the U.S. deals with this. They're not giving up their proxy forces. No way. And what's going to happen is all those members that were in al-Qaeda and all the other groups that are terrorists, they're all going to flow into this new one. It's a simple trick. Now, the U.S. wants Russia to give them a week-long regime of silence. They want Syria and Russia to stop bombing. So they can go through and filter out who is moderate and who is not. Now, what they're doing right now is they want to save all the terrorists, bring them into the new group, and say these are the moderates. The force will get bigger and bigger. And if they have this time period of keeping the bombing subdued for 1 week, they will have the ability to move almost all of the forces into this new group. And we can see this is their plan right now. This is how they're trying to get around all of this. They really don't want peace or a ceasefire. They're just regrouping. They're getting ready to go after Assad. The goal is still the same. Because if they're just going to get rid of all the terrorists there, why would the U.S. even need to be there? Once this is complete, the U.S. has no business being... Actually, they have no business being there right now. Assad hasn't even invited them in. They invaded a country. But once it's done, and they get rid of the terrorist groups, all that's left is the moderate rebels. And guess what? The Syrian forces and the Russian forces, they're not going to let them get anywhere with this. Russia might step back and just let Syria completely demolish the moderate rebels. And the U.S. knows that this would happen. Now, Carter, which we talked about yesterday, was out there saying that once the Islamic State is beaten, we're going to have to control everything. And he went a little bit further. And we talked about this a long time ago, where wherever the Islamic State is, this is where the U.S. will have to go back into and control. And he's saying that American troops may have to continue their missions in many other countries. And this is all part of it because they're going to need to control everything that they're losing right now. And they're getting prepared to do this. They were hoping to get that authorization for war passed, but it never got traction. They tried all the different events. They tried to push it, but it just never went anywhere. Now, since the Islamic State is losing ground in Iraq, losing ground in Syria, they're being beaten, they're on the run, not because of the United States, because of Russia, Syria, and the Iraqi forces. We see FBI Director James Comey. Well, he's warning that the eventual defeat of the Islamic State would be a major problem. Because as the Islamic State is on the run, all of them are not going to die on the battlefield, which means they'll have the opportunity to attack the West. The White House is out there saying since Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra are splitting, al-Nusra might attack the West. And what we're seeing right now is that they're getting prepared for this event, and they continually throw all this information at us, all the propaganda at us, that these terrorist groups are coming to get us. And we can see that since the U.S. is backed against the wall, since Russia and Syria are beating the Islamic State, the U.S. is in big trouble right now. And of course, they have two options. One, go along with Russia, have peace in the Middle East, let the people take back their countries, let them use a different currency besides the petrodollar, and that would collapse the entire system here in the United States. They can just let that happen. Actually, most likely, it'd probably be the best solution to avoid war. And let us here in America take control of our central bank. Get rid of the private Western central bank system. Get rid of those government officials that want war. That would be a nice way of ending this. But we know this is not how it's going to end. We know they will never let that happen. We know from past history, they always want to get to their goal. And if they can't get to that goal, they're like children. They will scream, they will yell, they will point fingers, blame everyone else, and then start a war. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.